Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ITAP Academy Connect series, Navigating the New Normal and Beyond in the Semiconductor Sector. So before we begin, let's get everyone warmed up with a trivia quiz. So a poll question will be popping out on your screen. So just read the question and you have about 30 seconds to choose your answer. So the question is, which is the largest end-use segment for semiconductor products? Is it A, PC computers, B, communications, C, industrial, D, consumer, E, automotive, or F, government? So basically the poll was closed, and then so thank you so much for your participation. So let me just take a look at the poll results that's flashed on the screen. So give me a while to digest the information. So let's just see. All right, so it seems that the majority of the audience is in agreement that PC and computers, as well as communications, is the largest end use for semiconductor products, and the lowest score is actually government. So actually to review the correct answer is actually B, communication, which is the largest end use for semiconductor products. So the question is, why is it so? So according to Statista, about 33% of the semiconductors produced went towards the communication segments in 2019, which basically consists of devices that are capable of sending and receiving a signal, such as your smartphone. So in the past few years, growth of the global semiconductor industry has been driven largely by demand from the communication electronics, such as mobile phones, and the proliferations of applications, including the use of Internet of Things and cloud computing. So continued enhancements of existing products and the inclusion of emerging technology, such as AI in products and 5G networks, will be some of the market's key driving factors. So moving on, but that's not all. So just to share a little bit of trivia. So though the communication segment may be the largest end use for semiconductor products at this moment, in one of Deloitte's study, the option E, automotive sector and AI, is actually the next emerging segments which will provide semiconductor companies with abundant opportunities. Again, so why? So this is because in the automotive sector, the adoption of safety-related electronic systems have grown explosively. Hence, automotive semiconductor vendors will actually benefit from the surge of demand for various semiconductor devices in cars, including microcontrollers, MCUs, sensors, and memory. In addition, automation, electrification, digital connectivity, and security will result in the addition of more semiconductor content to automotive electronics and subsystems in the next decade. So that's all from my end, and I hope that this poll gives you some insight to what our audience would think and that you found the trivia sharing interesting. So let me pass the stage back to Jane, who will continue on today's topic. So over to you, Jane.
Thanks so much, Daphne, for the icebreaker. Hi everyone, I'm Jane. I'm glad to be your host. Welcome to this episode of ITAP Connect series, where we bring you insights through conversations with invited speakers, as well as opportunities to network and interact with the community of like-minded participants and industry peers. So this series of web engagements is designed to address some of the top-of-mind issues and challenges faced by industries and businesses in this time of disruption and beyond. We are delighted to collaborate with the Singapore Semiconductor Industry Association, or SSIA, for today's session that includes 2 breakout sessions, as well as post-session activities at our community platform called Interchange. So before we get started, we'd like to run a quick poll to gauge our audience's sentiments on a few questions. Your responses could be useful for our speakers to have in mind as we get into the discussions later, okay? So while we let you work on that, let me introduce Mr. Ang Wee Seng, Executive Director of SSIA, to kick off today's session with some remarks to set the context for our discussions later. Wee Seng, please.
Thank you, Jane. So firstly, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's session. It is my pleasure to have you all join this webinar and to talk about the new norms, for the semiconductor sector. But before that, I would like to thank the ITAP team for the collaboration that enabled us to bring this platform to you all. So that especially for the companies, both the NMC, also the SMEs, and we have a pretty good, healthy turnout this afternoon. Now, I can't start my speeches without mentioning the only thing that we've been living through the past half a year, and unfortunately that would be COVID-19 impact. Now, COVID-19 basically has impacted all industries, and semiconductor is not spared from this also. But the difference between semiconductor industry compared to the other industry, we do have a very different way of being impacted. First, the good news, we do see a pretty strong demand for semiconductor, at least for the first half going to the second half of this year. Many of the big MNC companies have reported a strong demand. But because of all the issues that we have been seeing with COVID-19, with the closing down of the borders across the nations, the crossing of Malaysian borders, for example, it has created a new problem for semiconductor industry. So around May timeframe, SSIA has conducted a pulse survey across the industry, and we have a pretty good feedback from the companies. And I'd like to show you this slide. You can see that on the screen. It kind of gives you an idea of the challenges that our companies are facing in this industry. The three main ones are basically shortage of workers, and this is, like I mentioned, due to travel restriction, especially the Malaysian workers. So those that are running factories, the manufacturing group, they have a sudden problem now. Demand is there, workers is not there. So that's one issue in terms of shortage of workers. Supply chain disruption is another problem. Now, supply chain disruption has been around for quite a while, even before COVID-19. But COVID-19, with all the restriction, is creating a bigger problem and bigger headache for the industry also. And finally, because of, again, all the border closing, we do see a problem with logistics and freight. So not only are the prices going up, but the slots are basically sparse now, and they can't get committed slots from the freight forwarders. And with that, there's a problem meeting commitment to the customers in terms of the delivery time also. So these are just some of the problems that we see. And to a certain extent, we should also look at this as an opportunity, not just a problem. So we are thankful that we do not face a similar problem like what we see in the other industry where like for example aerospace, seeing a mass retrenchment happening. Our side is pretty healthy. In fact, we are there helping to recruit some of these workers to bring them over to our industry to fill the gap that I mentioned in terms of the shortage of workers. Now, one of the feedback during this pulse survey is also that many of the companies are expediting their plan to automate and digitalize their businesses. Not so much because of today's COVID-19 situation. They have a short-term solution in place, but long-term, there could be a possibility of another pandemic, or worse, the wave 2 of this pandemic that will hit us. So a lot of the companies are pulling in, and the past 2 months, effort that have been put in place, they said, it could have been a plan that would take probably 2 years. They're pulling back by only 2 months. So you can see there's a very sudden surge of this interest by the industry, both NMC and also the SME. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about SSIA and the role that we play. Now, SSIA has gone through a major transformation over the past 2 years. We are today given the mandate by the government to drive the electronic industry transformation map, ITM. Probably you have all heard of it who are in Singapore. So in 2017, the government has decided to put 23 industry to a transformation map. And they wanted the industry to lead the transformation itself. And for the electronic sector, SSIA was identified to do this job. So in a nutshell, in the most simplistic form of it, we focus on 3 areas under the ITM framework. We help companies improve productivity, we help companies innovate their product and services, and most importantly is to help companies and the industry grow the talent pool that will support the industry today and into the future. So during this crucial time, it requires the companies to transform in a more concerted way and a more coordinated way in line with the framework of ITM that we practices. So especially the SMEs, we need to focus a lot in that area, and digitalization of this area, the SMEs will be the key in ensuring the survival of this industry into the future. So currently, with the support of all the NMC in our network, the bigger companies, there is a commitment from them to basically ensure that we approach this in a more ecosystem manner approach, so that the SMEs will all be brought up, the local companies will be brought up together to come together as a success story and hit the ground running far better in the future when we're out of this COVID situation. So semiconductor industry plays a vital role in the world. Though we remain strong and resilient, we need to ensure that we continue to transform to stay bigger and better in order to be competitive and relevant in the future too. So I'm heartened to see that many of the industry players are putting in place the effort and the strategy in place to grow their businesses and the industry in the past few months. And I hope that this event that we have today will bring you all some insights on how some of the companies are approaching this. And we hope to see us grow together as an industry in this, in this realm. I also like to take this opportunity to introduce to you all to the Singapore Semiconductor Voice magazine. You should be able to see that on the screen now. It's a publication that we created about 2 years ago. It is technically speaking by the industry. The content is by the industry and is meant for the industry. So you can see there's a lot of content there, from the research studies to the content of some of the offerings by companies. So it is free download. Feel free to download based on the QR code and obtain your copy, and hope you enjoy the reading it. Now, without further ado, I'll pass it back to Jane, and I'll join you all again in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wee-Seng. Actually, we have the results from the poll earlier. I wonder whether we can show on screen. Yeah. It's actually question number 2. What are your concerns in adopting Industry 4.0 in your business? These are the responses from our audiences. I wonder whether Wee-Seng, you want to respond to what our audiences are telling us. Seems like they think cost of transformation is too high. They can't afford the full-scale transformation. Maybe we can address that later, right, during our discussion. Yeah, and then also, of course, the next point is that cybersecurity and data management, their fears and on the security front. Yeah, I think these would probably be, we'll probably address them at some point among our panels or speakers. So maybe we have this in mind at the back of our heads as we carry on the conversation. Yeah. Okay, everyone take a snapshot. Okay. So I think at this point, maybe we can have Wee-Seng kick off with the questions that he actually sounded out our panel of speakers. There's some specific questions that you would like to have them address. So maybe Wee-Seng, you can take it on with maybe with the first one. We talked about supply chain disruption for a while now. Maybe we can dive a little deeper on this topic in terms of how it has actually affected the semiconductor sector.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So so I think one of the biggest topic, and I mentioned this in my opening, right, is one of the challenges that the industry is facing is on the supply chain disruption. And this is not something that happened only over the past 6 months with the pandemic that hits us. It has been there since the past years. In fact, made worse by the US-China trade tension, the whole Huawei fiasco and so on and so forth. And now with the COVID situation, it's becoming worse. So, maybe Roseanne, if you're there, it's a question that I'd like to, ask you is, in your mind, how has this impacted our industry over the past months, in fact, years, and how is the ongoing issue and the challenges still playing out?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So nice to be here today and maybe to contribute a little bit my perspective on the topic. And I would like to say that the disruption we faced in the past, like trade war or shortages due to upsurge of demand, are fairly different from what we have been experiencing over the past couple of months. In general, I think the disruption has come in 3 waves. So we had the early wave, where the pandemic was mainly, which was at that time on the epidemic, was mainly affecting China. Then it turns into China getting slightly better and Europe popping up. And then it went back to the region with the lockdown measures implemented throughout the world. So it started from a very country-specific to something which became a worldwide disruption. And thus, different semiconductor company will have likely to be affected in different ways, depending on your footprint. So if you have a huge footprint in China, you might have seen a lot of disruption at the beginnings and starting to get better. If you have a more spread around footprint, be it for your own manufacturing, your manufacturing partners, or your supplier, then you might have perceived or received the disruption in a different ways. So through this disruption, we had different types of impact. So we had impact on the raw material, as obviously when some country went into lockdown, some of our supplier could not produce or could not operate at full scheme. Thus, we saw disruption in raw material, which subsequently impact production. We saw disruption in our manufacturing partners. So it depends again if you are heavy on internal manufacturing versus outsource. You might have different company might have been impacted in different ways. We saw some extension of lead time as a consequence of it. And obviously, in today's semiconductor supply chain, we have a very broad network, so means our material and our product circles the globe a couple of times before they reach the end customer. And naturally, everything which is impacting intercompany shipment or shipment to customer became dramatic. And this is where the freight shortage became quite a threat in the environment. Even more than raw material shortage, I should say. As raw material, we have our own supplier. You have your good partner. You can negotiate, find arrangement. You might have had some buffer on your side, thus you were less impacted when they could not produce. But freight, we are sharing with all the other industry. So means you have to make sure you have good partners so that you can secure some space for yourself. And this is really fairly different from the rest of the impact. So now I think you had a question as of how it is today. So I think today the situation has improved dramatically in most of the area I mentioned before. Though freight remains very tight. And thus any initiative, and I think the Singapore government was very active to push for securing and increasing some capacity between Singapore and some of the countries in the region. So that's definitely those kind of initiative does help. We still see some up and downs in the lockdown. So currently Philippines, I think, is going back into, after an improvement, going back into a lockdown situation. So that's also going to remain pretty fluid. Newly, as our supplier in general are reopening, we might also see that they are impacted by having COVID case on their own manufacturing site, and thus that create an additional new disruption. And at large, lead time remains a bit on the high side. So I think it's not that we are operating as smooth as what we could hope. I think in general, we have it, at least on the AMS side, we have it well contained. But we still need to really monitor closely the situation and reactivate a crisis team if there is upsurge in, again, lockdown in different countries. So I think what worked very well to manage this crisis is really to have a crisis team who is able to assemble quickly, to share information, to tackle action, to bring transparency, to help to adapt priorities. And that's really a good learning for us to make sure that we have this, we keep agility and we are very agile to react to any new disruption.
I see. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And this is exactly what I observe also with many of the companies. They do have crisis team on standby because the situation is so dynamic now. And talking about nation shutdown is one thing. Then, at the same time, whenever you open the news, you listen to what the US and China is saying to each other. That again stirs another problem. So exactly, I agree with the concern there, right? So, one of the other areas that I see, at least in semiconductor and electronics industry here, is that we are pretty dependent to China and the other Asian markets. So John, and by the way, to the audience here, John is from Inficon, and he's one of the leaders in the smart manufacturing realm, working very closely with the Semi Group in the US. So John, I'm just wondering, in your opinion, how has the market shifted so far, on the dependency with China and the Asian market, and are certain sectors within the semiconductor electronics doing better than others? For example, the consumer, the automotive versus the cloud computing, communication, connectivity, etc. So, what do you think, John?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I'm from the U.S. I'm speaking to you from Austin, Texas. It's, what time is it here? 2 o'clock in the morning. So good afternoon, good morning to me.
Good morning.
No problem. But you're right. Clearly there's such market forces that unfortunately are many times political in nature, as we see now between particularly China and the US with some of the trade conflict that's ongoing, that have influenced the disposition of really manufacturing and investment in upcoming manufacturing capabilities Of course, SEA, Southeast Asia, Singapore, etc., is probably one of the primary beneficiaries of this, if there's such a thing as a beneficiary from a trade war. And I would say that, no one here, I think, is for trade wars, but certainly as a reality, the SEA region is doing much better because it's a safe haven for many of the supply chain acquisition folks. So I think we definitely see that. I will say that there's another wave concern in the United States, which I don't know how much you've read about, but more recently there is this push to even go further and try to demand for domestic manufacturing of microelectronics for what they refer to as kind of key infrastructure systems, and which is a fairly significant part of our demand. So I'm not a politician and I don't want to get into that, but we certainly see, I would say, a fair amount of disruption in the political part of demand, right? And I would just say that certainly to date, they have all really bolstered support for the SEA region. That would be my executive summary. Now, the better question, the easier question is demand, right? And I always hate talking about politics, get yourself in trouble. But the reality is that, just as you pointed out in the survey question, which I didn't know was going to be the question, really it's communications that is just exploding. And by the way, we're all here on Zoom, which we wouldn't have been doing 6 months ago. And so you can imagine the explosion of demand globally for almost anything. And on top of that, you add the 5G migration that was already planned. And so there's just this continued explosion in the communication sector, which is really great. But the opposite side is that the pandemic has really cratered the automotive industry, which was already suffering prior to I think most people may not realize that the automotive industry was already in a slump before the pandemic hit. And now it's been just really hit quite hard. It's ironic because that industry is driving the technology and the requirements relative to things like defectivity, product quality, failure rates, and a lot of kind of new exciting technologies, yet the demand has kind of waned. We don't see yet really people backing off on the investments to support it. There is a general feeling it'll come back, post the pandemic. I certainly support that belief, and I think all the investments being made for the new capabilities that will be required to support the evolution of the automotive, particularly autonomous vehicle quality standards, are good strategic investments.
Yeah, interesting. You're right. And one of the survey result is spoken also, right? So communication is in fact the key. But with the soon to be outburst of business from the 5G realm, and 5G is going to be a merger with the automotive industry also. You can imagine this will be a huge opportunity for the industry moving forward in the future also. So thanks, Absolutely. John, for the insight. So I would like to now bring the audiences to a little bit more on the topic of digitalization and automation. And maybe Akansha, this is something that you could help us with. So Akansha is the CEO of SenSe. It's a artificial intelligence, I would say, but there's more to it in terms of what she and her company is doing for the industry. Now, Akansha, the pandemic has definitely caused a push to many companies in wanting to adopt digitalization and automation in their business processes, more so today and into the future. Now, as a successful startup, SME startup over the past year, I've seen how you have gone through lots of companies with businesses, right, in the space of artificial intelligence. Are you seeing this trend? And are you only seeing this trend, especially in the NMC, or it's also in the SMEs, area? Akansha?
Hey, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me on board. So I'm seeing the acceleration very much. I can speak from my experience working with huge foundries, IDMs, and SMEs. The trend is pretty much similar between them. Everyone is rethinking priorities right now. So the adoption of AI has additional reasons in addition to the pandemic, which is timing. So I think companies are realizing that compute have become much more affordable and machine learning algorithms have become ready now. In addition, everything is getting complicated in terms of manufacturing. The tech nodes are shrinking and they have to figure out a way to make successful deliveries in time to their customers. Like John mentioned about the demand that has a surge right now, specifically for communications. So I think collaborating and understanding the connections between all of these parameters, there is a definite need for such solutions. And I see a similar trend of adoption between SMEs and MNCs with respect to AI solutions. I think what pandemic has done is made it very explicit and inevitable for companies to think about it.
Correct. So maybe I'll go back to Roseanne again, if you don't mind. So Roseanne is, of course, the head of global supply chain management for AMS. Just a question. So I was mentioning that companies are now adopting digitalization and automation, all the solution now. In the space of supply chain, is this one area, adoption of this more so globally will help, to address some of these challenges that supply chain is seeing?
Okay, I have two answers to this question. Mm-hmm. The answer before the pandemic and the answer after the pandemic or through the pandemic. So before the pandemic, I would have told you digitization, I'm all for it, we have to prepare for it. And I guess I joined ITAP a couple of times in the past because I'm pretty convinced this is the way to go. This is where we will be able to make better decisions assisted by intelligent computation. Mm-hmm. Now, in the midst of the pandemic, I guess all of us know that AI or machine learning rely on a lot of training data. And when you face a situation which is as disruptive as what we've been facing over the last couple of months, I think this is where, as human, we should be lucky we still have a value. So we are still there to take over what the machine might feel lost because it never happened before. So for me, that helps me to articulate the future role of digitalization versus the human in the workplace from an original thinking as of, do we still have a job in the future, to thinking where this is where the human will partner with the machine will help with the computation, with establishing visibility. So I think this is really what is one of the momentum behind Industry 4.0 is this horizontal integration where each node of the supply chain are connected. And of course, when you have such a disruption, having this connection and ability to know at any point in time what is happening in each of your nodes is extremely important. But then the human takes over to make decisions, to decide to reroute based on the latest knowledge or phone call with your freight agents that you suddenly secure a slot on a flight which is not your usual flight, and you just want to capture this opportunity because that's the best to get out of the country and to move to your next node. So I think moving forward, this will be a partnership between human and machine. Definitely the algorithm helps to make better anticipation. But I'm more interested in, from a supply chain perspective, in the visibility those technology can bring, so that this supports the action taking and the conclusion or the making sense of what's happening around.
No, I totally agree with you. So you're right. Industry 4.0, I mean, there's also a misconception by many people, that especially in the working group, that this will replace humans, right? But you should look at it more of how it complements the human and how we work. You look at today with the pandemic, one of the biggest adoption across some of the manufacturing companies is the AR and VR solution. So many of these workers are now working from home, but technically speaking, they can be on site with all this type of solution out there. So it's pretty interesting, for this. But of course, one point that I always highlight when we talk about complementing, with human, with these machines and everything else, is the ability for the workers to want to upskill and upgrade themselves to get themselves into this whole I4.0 realm also, yeah. So thanks a lot, Roseanne, for the insight. Now, there's this, in Singapore, we have this thing called the Smart Industry Readiness Index, SIRI Index, that kind of show, the scale of readiness for a company or a company in terms of the I4.0. And SIRI Index last year, we have seen how semiconductor industry actually has one of the highest index among all other industries. I think the next together with pharmaceutical group, meaning our companies in this industry are very well adapted to the industry 4.0 adoption already. So they're pretty up there. But at the same time, we also have a pretty bad tail end of it, which also shows that many companies, if they do not adopt the I 4.0, they are way lacking many other companies in many other industries. And this is especially so for the local SMEs. So maybe John, and I know that you have solution in this space also, but what do you think we can do to help a lot of these SMEs, adopt the industry 4.0? And I think this also goes back to one of the questions that the survey, surfaces earlier. One of the biggest concerns is about cost. What do you think are the challenges that SMEs will face, adopting the I 4.0 in their business, and how can we help them?
That's a great question. And, like most things in life, education is one of the best answers, right? So there's a tremendous amount of misperceptions around smart and the costs. And, there are people, oh my God, I need a new MES. I need all this investment. It's going to cost me millions of dollars to get started, none of which is true, okay? So it's very, very important to separate kind of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt from the reality. And, get in contact with a good company is as much a consultant as they are a salesman. And they're there to help assess what you currently have and what the gaps are. The reality is that for particularly the SMEs, there are such low-cost solutions today. I've been in the industry 35 years, and over the last 5 to 10 years, the prices of almost everything required to do smart manufacturing have dropped exponentially. So that combined with SaaS solutions on the solution space, not just from us, but from other companies, have really dropped dramatically the cost of doing smart manufacturing. I mean, you still have to have digitalization of your factory. You need to know tool state. You need to know location. But location tracking, we went from super expensive RFID, millions of dollars for a plant, to camera-based systems like are used in Amazon and Walmart for $100,000. So there's just so much that's changed, but the average fab manager of the SME site thinks it's too expensive and doesn't want to engage. So I would argue really it's about us as solution providers engaging, educating, and it's about the industry overall helping them to connect the different pieces, because the best solution for a smaller firm is not necessarily a huge multinational in consulting firm, as opposed to an aggregation of some smaller companies that oftentimes have a higher value proposition. That's just kind of my thought.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Education is one of the key factors to help many of these SMEs. And, I do a publicity or advertisement here. I mean, SSI alone, we have organized or we are actually partner several institutions like Singapore Polytechnic, for example, and we have actually customized what I would call industry relevant courses that can help a lot of these SMEs, get their workers in to upskill and upgrade their capability into this whole I 4.0, concept. And it's not just Singapore Poly, right? We have a partnership with NUS Scale and many more. So there are courses out there that will help the workers. It's just a matter of reaching out to these SMEs, and getting them educated. But John, in terms of the points that was mentioned earlier in the survey, cost, I think SMEs do have concern when it comes to cost. Now, maybe one thing I'd like to add also, right, in Singapore, we do have schemes and grants out there that will help businesses upgrade and their systems and everything else where necessary. These are some of the programs and schemes that companies can tap into. They can check out from the websites and things like that. But at the same time, I think solution providers, like for example Inficon, I'm sure you also have solutions out there that could help SMEs, in terms of the skill of what they need. Because I don't think every SME will require the most greatest and highest tech like what NMCs required. But maybe at their level, they require a scaled down version of a solution that that is towards that direction. I'm sure that you do have that, right?
It's a great question. And, Inficon is a Swiss company. We're very stable. It's a great firm to work for. They bought FPS, my company, a couple years ago. And we do that. We basically have what we would call tiered solutions and tiered pricing, kind of based on the scope and size of your requirements, right? And I think that's something not all providers can do, but, really it's a requirement because, the factory that has 100 tools is going to have a different budget, if you will, for smart automation than one that has 2,000 tools, okay? And you need to be able to adjust to the requirements. I mean, well-managed companies have one set of software that can actually solve the problem, so you don't have different development teams, but you have different business models from a pricing and engagement perspective that can dramatically change the economics so that, you know, the broader requirements can be met by a smaller company, mid-sized company, large company. And certainly Infocon does that, and I would say that some of our competitors are starting to do that, but I think it's a necessity. It really is. We've got to have cost-appropriate solutions, and those are coming around really just in the last 18 months, I would say, as this industry is maturing.
Thanks a lot, John.
Sure.
So, Akansha, maybe back to you. You know, this question is a little bit more of a generic question. Now, beyond the current accelerated shift towards digitalization and Industry 4.0, do you think that there is a real mindset shift, you know, in the long-term focus, or is this current situation just a surge of interest, more like a knee-jerk reaction because of the whole COVID situation? You know, what do you think?
Thank you, Weesing, for the question. I think there was a joke in the first quarter of 2020 wherein people were just trying to decipher what just happened and how can they make peace with the fact that it is going to stay for a while. Now that things have become, that this is the new normal, as we are saying, people have made the realization that there has to be a long-term mind shift in the whole process. And this I can say from the quality of requests that we are receiving for the demonstrations of the products, the kind of seriousness that companies are putting in now to prepare the data sets that are required to adopt such technologies. So I think there has been a shift towards more long-term as opposed to a knee-jerk that was seen in the Q1 of 2020. Companies are asking for more holistic playbooks and discussing the long-term plans of implementing technology. So I would say it's more long-term as opposed to knee-jerk.
No, I agree with you. I think one of the points that many of the companies today, I mean, having now living through the whole COVID situation, they know that this is not a game anymore. They have to get serious and real about it. You know, getting into this digitalization solution is not just survival for today, but survival for tomorrow. What if there are more, you know, other pandemic that hit them in future? I think this is real. And I agree with you. It's not going to be a knee-jerk. I think this is for real, right? They're going to do a total transformation this time around. So thanks a lot, Akansha, for that feedback. So yeah, COVID-19 would, you know, has definitely created a new norm for the way we run our industry, the way we run our businesses and operations. You know, and it's a clear trend that many of the companies are going to adopt Industry 4.0 solution in a way to be resilient for the future. Now, this trend is not only seen in our industry, it's also seen in across all other industries. And I think semiconductor plays a significant and very important role in this roadmap, you know, to enable this for many other industry. I mean, I see a question from, you know, the audiences here about teachers. So, you know, the question is, how can semiconductor help the teachers, right? Now, unfortunately, we don't directly help the teachers per se, but solution providers out there, the solution makers, you know, they have all the tools and ideas and solutions out there that requires a chipset from semiconductor that will help in that realm. And one very classic example is what we are doing today, Zoom. It is a platform that's being used today. You know, we are doing all these webinars through Zoom. And, you know, as time goes by, this will become more effective. I know there are some complaints out there about, you know, having a bad connection. It will only get better, you know, with the implementation of future 5G network and things like that. So maybe open up to the three panels here. You know, if you have any comment about the resilience of our industry and how we will help all the other industry drive towards I 4.0 too. So maybe Roseanne, you have any input on this, yeah?
I just wanted to follow up on the question on the resilience and whether digitalization is there to stay. What I didn't like at the origin of Industry 4.0 is it's called the fourth industrial revolution. I don't think it's a revolution. It's going to be an evolution. It will take some time. But that's also why I like the Smart Industry Readiness Index and the way it has been constructed, in the sense that it's very holistic. It helps you to build a roadmap as of where do you want to be and how to tackle those areas which are the most relevant for your company in particular. And this is valid for SME and MNCs. So yes, SMEs have a concern on cost. MNC always looks a little bit richer or having a bigger pocket. But we also have budget. We also have cost constraints. And thus we have to prioritize our way forwards towards digital and what will create the best return on investment at a specific point in time. And I think this is where the index is helping. So the index is helping you to assess yourself around all the 16 dimensions, if I remember correctly. And then it helps you to say, okay, based on where I am today, and based on my budget and based on the opportunities, say maybe I start with this. And then once you have laid this foundation, you move to the next level. Because what we have all to recognize is in this journey, you need to lay the foundation. So you cannot run if you don't know how to crawl. Data is of the utmost importance. So if you are not collecting data, if you are not storing data, if you are not cleaning up your data, there is no idea to jump to the next stage and have already a solution which is relying on those data because the outcome will not be of good quality. So I think that's going to be a long journey for all. Everyone will progress along the way. There are a lot of practice like what ITAP is aspiring for to help maybe leaders connecting with people who want to learn, and thus best practice sharing so that the whole industry within Semicon and outside Semicon progress. Considering that for semiconductor, I think we are in an interesting position because on the one hand, we are consuming the solution, but on the other hand, our products are fueling the solution. So we have a dual responsibility in this whole development.
I love the last sentence that you mentioned, being a consumer and also the designer of the solution.
Wei-Seng, I want to jump in here. We are coming up to time in about 3 minutes, but I have a question for Roxanne, actually. I'm glad you mentioned Siri because I was wondering, during this period, has Siri taken a setback in terms of like how the overall industry, in adopting the framework for Siri? Do you think there's been a bit of a setback?
I mean, we have to be honest. So this disruption and the impact it created was so serious that every company had to first think about surviving. Thus, your first priority was at the beginning to make sure you would have the situation under control. You would have reestablished your supply, manage your freight, and things like this. So that's just pretty natural.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that as the situation starts to relax, all what we had planned to do will stay on hold. So in my organization, we had a lot of projects which we aligned in our strategy workshop at the beginning of the year. We might have slowed down, or some have slowed down because we cannot meet face to face, and thus the communication takes longer time and things like this. But if we want to continue to grow, we have to get those through, and thus we will have to replace the attention. So I think it's not really a step back. It's just company react in a short term because particularly the listed companies, they also have to show results on the stock market. But the fundamentals are there. Whatever you wanted to achieve is still in your mind. And we are all convinced that we need better visibility, we need better connectivity, we need VR solutions so that you can have maintenance, virtual maintenance on site. And thus it will just jump again once the time and the bandwidth from the team who are looking at the future will be granted. So I think it's It's a very great index. I just can encourage everybody who is on the call to go through the assessment. It has been enhanced as well with some, now the next layer is also to provide some recommendation as of what you can do. And it's a very good way to get started in your journey. You have to be humble when you fill it in because it's not a competition index. It's an index to see who you are, and it's there to help you to learn and continue to grow.
Thank you, Roxanne. So I guess the fundamental premises on which it's constructed remains valid. It's just a matter of time. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we are coming up to time. I'm sorry to cut off conversation here, but that's this is where we transition to the later part where we have 2 breakout sessions. But before we do that, do take a moment to let us know what you think of this session. I'm talking to the audiences, of course. Yeah, do stay with us as we transition, but I'll let you guys work on this satisfaction poll in the meantime. So in breakout room 1, my colleague Darren Sia will be joining Akanksha Jagwani from 6th Sense for a closer conversation on not only how AI capabilities are pushing the boundaries in semicon manufacturing, but also more fundamentally what it entails for manufacturers to make that leap to adopt and transform with Industry 4.0. And in breakout room 2, I will be joining John Becky of Infocon to take a closer look at what it means to deploy digital twins in manufacturing and how it makes sense to do so at this time. Okay? So for audiences who joined us via live stream on Facebook, the recording of today's session, as well as the plenary that we just heard, as well as the breakout sessions, will be made available after today. There'll be some instructions for you to join the chat in breakout room 2. The instructions will be in the chat room, but for those who are joining breakout room 1, please stay here. Okay, just sit tight. We'll do the transition very shortly.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me in this breakout segment where we encourage active audience participation and you can ask questions directly. A little housekeeping before we begin. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section. If you face any technical issues, please post a private message to our SingX help team using the chat function and someone will attend to you. Joining me today is Akanksha Jagwani, CEO and co-founder of 6th Sense Private Limited. The topic for this session is transforming capabilities with AI-powered insights. We will be touching on what it means to deploy and harness AI in the context of semicon manufacturing, how 6th Sense have applied deep learning techniques to enhance defect detection, and the journey of some of their clients have undergone to get on board. Akanksha, I am excited to jump straight into the topic. Perhaps you can begin by giving a 1-minute overview of what 6th Sense does and the key value proposition of the AI-powered defect detection.
Sure. Thanks, Darren. It's a pleasure to share with you all. 6th Sense augments the decade-old traditional techniques for defect identification with more robust and adaptive software that is based on deep learning and computer vision. Our first AI, Classif AI, helps manufacturers automatically analyze their visual inspection data to identify if there is a defect, and if there is, it recommends a defect class. This makes the whole defect review and classification process more consistent, accurate, detailed, and 24/7 reliable. We also help manufacturers connect the analysis across multiple inline and final inspection stations to learn at a very macro level about their product's quality. So in a nutshell, this is about 6th Sense.
Okay, so in your opinion, would you say these AI deep learning techniques are here to complement or perhaps even replace traditional defect detection methods in the fab? You know, what is the current situation like and what can we expect in the future coming forward?
Cool. The tricky one. So we are trying to discuss if it's going to replace the systems or is it going to complement them?
Correct, yes.
I would say whatever is correct from first principles of logic, it would stay and AI would complement it further. An example would be, let's say it will complement the data acquisition systems and maybe replace the rule-based approach of processing and decision-making. Another example would be that it will replace the human's tedious work on sourcing, tracing, and mapping the data from multiple stations. But it will help in accelerating the zooming in process to narrow down the root cause of the problem. So long answer short, I think it would do both. It depends on where we are applying AI and what is the system before that.
Right. Thanks for clarifying on that, Akansha. I think continuing along this topic, right, we all know that defects in the semiconductor processes can limit the yield, increase overall production costs, and also lead to time-dependent critical component failures. So this particular portion, right, and you're saying how AI could help in this defect detection. Could you share exactly how and where AI can be applied in the semicon process, and what benefits could one hope to achieve versus your traditional defect detection methods, and how it could complement these methods?
Cool. So what I can do, Darren, here is that I'll first of all share about the broad spectrum wherein AI can be applied in the whole semicon process. And then maybe next I'll dive deeper into sharing the benefits of implementing it as opposed to defect detection systems today. So where can AI be applied? I think fundamentally AI is nothing but a very reliable brain who you can delegate your critical decision making. So now we can start with very small siloed delegations like AI, help me classify defects at wire bonding stations. Help me bin at wafer sorting stations. And if AI does a good job there, we can delegate AI to connect decisions made at siloed stations. So this is like a very broad thought process behind where and how can AI be applied. And this concept can be extended to delegate AI to help you predict line yields as one of the applications, electrical performance at multiple stations. It can even help you with improving optical proximity corrections sometimes. It depends on how you are assessing the need and implementing AI in that case. Coming to the aspects of high value assets, it can help you understand when to maintain an equipment and not make it a periodic maintenance process. Given in the COVID situation, I think it's very essential to understand where to implement our human resources, the most valuable human resources, and make majority of mundane work automated. So I would see like there are a lot of work like John was mentioning in the previous session on scheduling. So looking at preemptive scheduling and planning processes from AI's mindset. Where else can it be applied? I think one of the very recent applications I've seen of AI is tracking your operators' actions and assisting them improve the performance and learn from their own experiences and patterns. So I think this is in a nutshell where all AI could be applied. Darren, do you think any other things where we see in the semicon process where we can add more value?
Yes, I think throughout the semicon process itself, AI has a very much complementary and enabling role to play. Right. Okay. So I noticed we have some questions from our audience. So maybe I'll pose it to you. So does Sixth Sense have any case studies to share? And what makes Sixth Sense approach unique in this whole realm of AI implementation for defect detection? Sure.
So maybe I can share on the case studies from our current manufacturing companies that we are working with. May I know from the audience if they would be more interested to learn more about applications and front-end fabs, or is the audience more interested in understanding about packaging side of manufacturing? Or I could share both, whatever is more convenient.
Yeah, Akansha, why don't you share both? I'm sure everybody will be interested to know the possible applications and the benefits that results from these methods.
Done. So let me start with the front-end fabs. One of the use cases that we are solving is automating the review of optical and SEM defect images that are collected in the inline inspection stations in a fab. So the problem statement is that currently visual defect review and classification is conducted 24/7 by highly trained human operators who closely examine images through the naked eye. And as chip sizes are continuing to shrink, manufacturing complexity is sharply increasing. This is making the whole defect identification process extremely challenging. Here, how have we applied AI is we have helped them automate the repetitive and cognitive challenging process. And ultimately, they have received benefits in terms of reducing the misclassifications, reducing the dependency on human judgments. And also this is helping them preserve their valuable domain knowledge and adding more consistency to the process. So this is one of the examples from front-end fabs where AI has helped make their journey more easy and more consistent.
Okay.
From the backend side, from the packaging side, I can share another example. Here, there are rule-based machines, AOI machines, automated optical inspection machines, which are working at the final inspection stations, helping manufacturers decide if a unit has to be rejected or shipped to the customer. Sometimes there are high errors in differentiating between minor deviations, and manufacturers are facing yield loss due to false rejections today. So the other problem that they mentioned was that there is a very unpredictable delay as extra lots have to start to compensate for the rejected yield losses here. And by implementing the 6 Senses AI technology, manufacturer was able to mitigate this as a learning-based system had learned the subtle variations and it was less sensitive to the defects next time. This ultimately lowered their false rejection rates and manufacturers were able to decide the lot disposition more accurately. So this is an example from backend of manufacturing where 6 Senses AI helped them in better decision making.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Akansha. Okay, it's a little bit technical for me, so I don't know whether this has already been covered in what you just shared. Did what you mentioned, the use case you mentioned, cover this area of wafer inspection?
Yeah. So basically the first use case was on wafer inspection. Typically today, there are wafer scan stations in front-end line where they are scanning a wafer. And after that, there are review stations where they are trying to manually classify the defects. And we are trying to help them automate that particular process.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Let's maybe switch gears a little bit and answer the other question coming from our audience here. And I think all technology, AI or otherwise, has certain limitations. This perhaps coming from the angle of the workforce, in what way do you think AI could, and I use the term very loosely here, harm or be a danger to those workforce or staff not so technically inclined in this area of AI, doesn't have the knowledge or the skills to implement this kind of system? What do you think is the impact then to the workers in the fab, from the ground level engineers and perhaps even to the managers overseeing the fab line?
Sure, Darren. I think the idea is to understand if they're going to be impacted, where can they find the next location. So there is always a place for doing more creative and eventful work. And this is where the current companies that we are working with, they are trying to find a proper roadmap to basically upskill these workers and put them into place where they enjoy the work more. We have had first-hand experience talking with operators where they feel like the current work is so mundane, so repetitive that it doesn't feel so exciting to do on a regular basis. So I think as a human, we are very creative and figuring out ways where you can add more value is what all very important. And I'm seeing the government here and also the companies putting in a lot of effort to figure out the right next place for these workers once AI helps them automate the processes.
Right. So it seems like the workers don't have to be so worried about their
Right.
job, right? Yeah, and it's really there to help them. The AI is there to help them and not basically to take away their jobs.
Absolutely right.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit, more quantifiable kind of benefits angle, right? what is the average improvement of the yield after implementing AI solutions on, let's say, wafer inspection?
Sure. I think giving out a number saying yield improvement X percentage is hard, but what we can see is where is AI applied in the whole manufacturing operation. So first of all, if we are applying the AI in making the human decisions automation at the inline stations, we can first of all understand how does it translate to less wafer scraps at the end of the line, and also help you with lesser line stops in between the lines. So I think in terms of yield, it would be one parameter to consider, but there are more parameters to look into the holistic picture. And the ultimate impact, like the starting point is how can you reduce misclassifications if you were to talk about the use case that I was mentioning just earlier. So when we talk about that, we have seen significant reduction in misclassifications. Well, it depends on the baseline that the company is operating at currently. If the company has current classification accuracies when humans are doing it, and they have put in an extra effort to create a system around tracking the performance today, the accuracy numbers were close to 70 to 80%. And with AI-based classification, the number of classification accuracy improved to above 90%. But ultimately, it is a function of your manufacturing floor, your data, and your operators. We have to look into that from that perspective. There is no absolute number that can be told here.
Right. And I say it may not be so immediately quantifiable, to quantify the success. But then, okay, then even if it's not quantifiable, intangible, or what do you think, from your opinion, would be a successful implementation of AI in the wafer fab operations, right? What, in your engagement with your clients and the case studies you see in your experience, what do you think or do you consider is a successful implementation of AI? You know, what are some of the things that in your mind would be considered successful, basically?
Sure. So Darren, I think it is about that AI can be quantified. The performance can be very much quantified. It is about, have you placed systems in place that are helping you track those parameters very well? Because as with any data analysis problem, whatever data is presented will help you make decisions based on that. So in order to quantify if AI is adding enough value to your operations today or not, it is important to set up a baseline first of all. And from there on, go on to tracking that. So I think I have seen companies tracking that in terms of their cycle time. They're trying to understand what was the number of line stops that was happening before AI was implemented and how did it reduce significantly. This track has helped them understand that. So basically, when we work with companies, we work at two stages. First of all, we show them and demonstrate them the technical feasibility of a use case. And second is the stage wherein once the technical feasibility has a green check, they go on to measuring the ROI of such projects. And in both the scenarios, the matrices that they use and the amount of effort they put are quite different.
I see. So I think from what I can gather is that the companies determine the success factors based on their own priorities, and or like what you mentioned, line stops could be one quantifiable measure, right? Okay, that's good. Okay, so I have another question here. I think it's interesting from the audience, right? I'll just read it out since I think it's a little bit above my technical knowledge. So hopefully it still makes sense to you. Okay, so this question is regarding third optical inspection process. Is it a 2D or 3D inspection? And what is the overkill or underkill %? So I hope it makes sense to you, but for me, yeah.
I would like to get a clarification on third optical inspection process. What I have gathered is that when you have a package or a wafer which you are trying to inspect, you can inspect multiple surfaces and of that particular unit, and also you can inspect it multiple times. So typically companies have a inspection process in which there is a station 1 which is doing inspection of all the units, and then they have a second check which humans do today. So I'm just trying to understand, is the third optical inspection process like a third check to inspect the same unit, or is it meaning something else?
I think let's go with the assumption that yes, it is
Sure.
the former what you mentioned and answer it that way. Yeah.
Got it, got it. So I think this was a very interesting use case that we were solving with a company in Singapore, in which we were trying to understand what was the overkill before applying 6sense for that particular package, and how did it significantly reduced in terms of the overkill. The false rejections were significantly reduced. So basically, they had a package, a LED package, which they were trying to understand. And well, I can't share the exact numbers of the company, but it was close to 20% overkill save that they were able to achieve by using AI-based inspection as opposed to rule-based inspection. I hope I answered the question from the audience in that.
Okay, thank you for that, Akansha. Oh, yeah, it seems this is a very hot topic because we are getting a lot of questions from the audience, which is good. And we have good audience engagement. So the next question here, right? Can AI be used for election mechanism process? What is the stake?
Election mechanism process.
Yeah. Okay, so
I think I don't quite get the election mechanism process.
Right.
I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah, sure. There's no issue. I think I may be reading it incorrectly. Never mind, it's okay. Let's go to another question here. So in your opinion, to what extent do these AI-driven methods fit with manufacturers' existing capabilities? Those companies have engaged so far and looking at the current state of the industry, does it tend to be a big leap for most of them to adopt this kind of AI-driven methods for the defect detection, or is it more like a small accessible step which they can take?
Sure. I think a lot of this depends on the mindset of the company and the scale of the project that they're trying to achieve here. So once these two are in place, nothing is a big leap. Everything is a small accessible step because they have thought through the process. They have put right milestones in place to keep tracking it. And once they're measuring something, they're seeing the benefits and then they're taking the next step. So I think a lot of it depends on the groundwork that is already completed and what support systems are already available. It also depends on the scale of the use case here. For example, most of our clients had a very clear problem definition of what they wanted to achieve, and they had set teams inside their companies who would help us gather data, who would help us clean the data. And that is where it just felt like a step change, because all they had to do was now have the brain inside the company to solve the problem for them. But there were companies who did not have a right data collection system in place, a right traceability system in place, and because of which they had to wait for a couple of months to start implementing the AI solutions. But as long as you have the right mindset, the right leadership team inside the company, it's quite possible to make it a step change as opposed to a leap big change.
Right. Okay. I think that puts it into a good perspective. And a related question, I think. You mentioned that definitely they need to have the data collection and all this in place, but perhaps now is a good chance to share with our audience, right? To give them a better sense of how they can start the journey of integrating AI into the existing production. What are basically the first, you mentioned they are small, they can take small baby steps, to get on this train basically. So what are the steps or the small steps they can take towards starting this journey of integrating AI and of course, enjoying the benefits of AI implementation?
Right. Thank you, Darren. This is a very great question. The most important thing, like I said earlier, was the mindset to transform. Having a collaborative mindset is just very important, and it just makes the journey very easy. The train that you were trying to catch would become just very smooth because you have thought about it. And after that, I would say once the leader has a mindset, the leader should set up a team of champions, of managers and engineers inside the company, and who should propose multiple problem statements. And based on the overall business objectives, they can prioritize which problem statement to integrate AI in. I think from there on, it becomes more of an execution strategy in the journey. In addition to prioritizing the business problem statement, some other points that I would highlight that they should consider in the whole journey would be picking a use case that is easier to validate and that is easier to win everybody's confidence inside the company that their effort was worth it. I think that's a very small stepping stone that is very important to be set up right in place in the first few months. Once you have a win-win situation, next I would recommend would be to check if supporting systems, like I was mentioning, data acquisition systems, storage systems are in place. And lastly, any successful implementation is also a function of feeding the right quality data into the AI while it's learning. And I feel like no better than the internal engineering team can understand their nuances of manufacturing processes and make this a successful implementation. So 3 things: having a proper business objective of implementing something, having the systems in place, and having the right team to implement such projects. I think if all 3 are in place, this could be a very great project for the company.
Right, thank you, Akansha. I think what you shared basically gave an idea that it's not impossible or that difficult to start on this journey, and it is in fact accessible to companies both large and small.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid, unfortunately, we are getting close to time, so we'll have to wrap up. Okay, I want to thank you, Akansha, for joining us today and sharing your perspective and insights. It was very interesting and engaging. Okay. For our audience, if you didn't have a chance to get your question answered, don't worry, you still have a chance to ask Akansha by joining our Interchange community platform, where you can post comments, interact with your fellow participants, and participate in discussions. Information on joining Interchange is shown in the chat room and in an email that you will receive after this session. Also, please take a moment to provide feedback on this session and do let us know if you have ideas for future topics. So you see the poll coming up on your screen now. Okay, your feedback will help us make future sessions even more interesting and engaging. A link of today's entire webinar will also be posted on ITAP Connect's website, so you can review what was being discussed and mentioned today. Once again, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at Interchange and having you join us in future episodes.
So we're here in room 2 with John Benke, where we'll be talking about digital twins, why they're more relevant than ever, and the issues around them. So John, apologies again for the delay just now. Now to kick us off, can you give us a quick overview of Inficon and what are the key value propositions of digital twins?
Sure. Inficon has been around. We just celebrated our 50th year anniversary late last year. Historically, it's kind of known as I mentioned, I think earlier, instrumentation company with gauges, a tremendous amount of sensors, RGAs, leak checkers, things like that. It's really migrating to be more of a fab-wide smart manufacturing solution provider. In my particular group, the IMS group, Intelligent Manufacturing Systems, which is the software part of Inficon. We have 2 groups, a FabGuard group, which is basically FDC, APC. Think of it as tool smart manufacturing, tool-centric, process-centric. And then we have my product line, which is the FPS product line, which is the group that works on the entire factory, integrates the entire factory for things like factory scheduling, optimization, in general, smart integration of all the disparate data sources. And so Inficon is investing very heavily in being able to come in and provide, really with the absence of an MES, almost everything else that you need to have a smart solution for a factory of any size. So thank you.
So Inficon's been around for decades. So how long ago did FPS come about?
Oh, great question. Sorry. So FPS is actually by itself about 13 years old, but we were acquired we were an independent company out of the United States, based in Austin, Texas, where I'm speaking to you from. And it was a relatively small firm that was really focused on scheduling and smart manufacturing before it was called smart, and kind of a leader in that space. And then Inficon purchased us in October of 2018. And it's really been great for us because we're able to go global now. Before we didn't have a global footprint, whereas Infocon has a large office in Singapore. Darren Lee leads our SEA team. It's a very large office, one of the largest offices Infocon has, although Infocon is a global company. So we're very, very excited to be part of Infocon, and thank you very much for asking.
So it sounds like this convergence of these two companies, right? It's almost like, if you think about it, it's the evolution of the whole industry, right? This came at the right time, where it's at the cusp of this whole movement towards smart manufacturing, and then the capabilities with AI and data analytics and all that all just came in around that time.
You are absolutely correct. I mean, you could not be more correct. I mean, this is one of these things where people say, well, what is I4O or smart manufacturing? And the reality is, it's this continuous improvement activity we've done for the last, well, many of us 30 years. But now with this incredible low cost compute, memory, and really sensorization, you cannot forget the sensorization aspect, which is largely having more information about the tool and process directly. And that's one of the things that Infocon does, because they've always made sensors, hardware. And I think, credit to the executive team, they realized, well, we need to integrate across the entire factory. And so I think that's what's the difference between successful companies today, are those that are leveraging software in their product lines. And yes, you are correct. It's really integrating with other systems. I mentioned earlier in our earlier talk, any solution we do, more than half of the things we're connecting have nothing to do with Infocon. There are other system solution providers that you're connecting.
So I guess I asked you this to set you up, because I know you have a deck of slides to share with us. Yep. So maybe it's time now to bring it up, because I want to ask you, you have a deck in one slide in your deck on the rationale for semi-smart manufacturing. I just wondered, how well have these rationales for semi-smart manufacturing stood up to the changed operating landscape in our current times?
That's a great question. I think you're referring to this slide here.
Yep.
Okay. So it turns out that it's, first of all, let me give you the audience a little background on the slide. Just, it's a great question because you've seen it, but let me help the people understand it. So this was done outside by an Institute on Smart Manufacturing, and they just tried to compare the rate of improvement under some of these key areas of productivity and compare the last 25 years rate of improvement to what is being anticipated and realized under the smart envelope. And quite frankly, it's somewhat amazing if you take a look at the fact that we're talking about a 13x improvement in on-time delivery, in the rate of improvement, 7x in overall productivity, 12x in CapEx and inventory. And the reality is, we're actually seeing that. I mean, that's the thing, that there's a lot of disbelief. It's kind of like, oh, is this marketing? Is this some consulting firm? But the truth is, this digitization, and particularly if you do it in concert with a high-resolution digital twin, is completely transformative compared to what we've been trying to do. If you go back in time, lean, continuous improvement, all the things we've done over the last 15 to 20 years, there's no comparison as opposed to what's happening in smart manufacturing today. And so the good news is it's getting a lot of press. The capabilities exist. The bad news is, like you mentioned on the talk, it's not being widely adopted, unfortunately.
So any guesses, percentage-wise, in reality, how many people are actually doing this, or is a long way to go, I reckon?
So there's an interesting question there, right? So first of all, you get into a little academics here, sorry, a tutorial. So what is smart manufacturing, right? And it's really important to understand that most things that a marketing person tell you is smart manufacturing really isn't. It just helps them sell their product, okay? If you go back to the folks that really originated this, it's all about the ability, and this is a good definition, it's really is manufacturing systems that respond in real time to meet changing demands and conditions, okay? Or another definition is pretty good, is digital twins assist people and machines in the execution of the task. Okay. But it turns out many people think because they have huge databases that they have a smart factory. That's not a smart factory. That's a data-rich environment, all right? And those are completely and totally different, all right? So there is this misnomer that the semi industry in general is, leading the world in smart manufacturing. I would argue from a deployer perspective that it's lulled to believe that, but many cases they're not really a smart factory, they're a data-rich environment. And so having said that, I want to do that precursor. Then you say, well, how many people are really doing it, right? And I think the answer there is probably 15%. I mean, it's just not very many. It's just one.
Or worldwide? 15.
Worldwide. I mean, it's just, and obviously that's driven by the fact that many of the large number of factories are not huge. They're at small to medium size. But it's just something where the leaders of the industry, or the thought leaders, or the ones with strongly driven managers or strong industrial engineering leaders, are taking charge, and they're becoming far more competitive, and their companies are benefiting. So we see right now it pivoting where we think people are, somewhat because of COVID, are now realizing the benefits, because the companies we work with that have already been doing this for 5 years were much, much better prepared for COVID than those that never started.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, huge difference.
But I guess there's a gap still, and the gap is still driven by cost, right? And unfortunately, right now, everyone's margins are kind of squeezed tight, and cost also a perennial concern. So when you think about adopting digital twins, they'll first of all think about, oh my God, this is going to cost me like X amount or whatnot. I think we had a conversation before. You want to dispel that, didn't you? Because you.
Oh, yeah, it's really a problem. I mean, it's generated by solution providers or basically people that are approaching factories. That really attack it from the big data side and try to suggest to a factory that they need to effectively replace everything they have to begin. There's nothing that could be further from the truth, okay? Don't get me wrong, if you don't have an MES, that's a different situation. But everybody on the call here has an MES, okay? I can tell you that we've worked with 13 different MESs, right? And most people probably couldn't name 3, And so the reality is that you don't need to replace your entire infrastructure. You need to integrate your existing infrastructure, identify the gaps. Typically, we see gaps in that people don't have good location tracking. If you make a digital twin, it turns out you need to basically digitally effectively know everything about the factory, which means what can run where, what the tool state is of every tool in the factory, and where everything is. This is not really that complicated. But so that means many factories have to add location tracking. Again, not very expensive anymore like it was. I will tell you the other big gap that we see is tool state information. To digitally create a digital twin, you need to know, is the tool up? Is it down? Pretty easy. Is it a lot loaded on the tool? Is the lot started running? Has the lot ended? And has it been picked up? 4 states, okay? Turns out if you don't have a SexGem connection on all your tools, and some legacy factories do not, or if you're in a back end, some of them don't have the same standards. There are a number of great companies today that for a relatively low cost can interface with your historical tool and create just that data, put it in your MES, and once you've got that, a company like us, and I'm sure there are others, can come in and just aggregate all this data and transform your factory and get you 25% more productivity literally overnight. I mean, it's not as hard as one would normally, I guess you could say, expect if you're not in the business.
And then, of course, but we've been talking mainly about the technology side of things. There's also the human side of it, right? I mean, you got the mindset, maybe the skills and whatnot. I don't know. That's, I guess, is also a key part to this whole equation of who is ready for adopting, right? So apart from like the big guys you mentioned earlier, even a small guy, a small manufacturer could be ready if they have the right mindset, right?
No, I mean, you hit it right on the head. I mean, I always tell people, and I try to be polite and honest with all potential clients or customers, is that, the amount of time it's going to take to do a project with you and whether it's successful or not has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you. That's not 100% true, but it's mostly true. Because when we look at all the projects we've done, those that are super successful have a strong leader. They have a believer. They understand you're making a complete and total change in approach and methodology, and they support that. And they're there to help support the transition at everything from an operator level to a supervisor level, to an IT organization, to a planning organization. So if you have the right mindset, things go very well, you know? If you don't, and you've got an IE guy that is excited about it, but the rest of the company is like, oh, this is a fad that'll go away, you've got a long road ahead of you that's extremely painful, and really it's unfortunate. So yeah, you're right. The single biggest determinant today, even I would argue more so than the budget, is the leadership of the particular factory. That's been our experience.
This might be a bit of a left field question because we didn't really talk about this, but this just came to me because we're talking about mindset, right? We tend to associate it with the younger crowd, so to speak. I just wondered, for the semicon industry, is there a sense of like this? It tends to be, what's the average age range for people working in the industry?
Wow, that is such a great question, though. It's certainly unprepared. I mean, we used to joke at Semicon West, which is the one in North America, in San Francisco, that every year the median age of the attendees went up 1 year, which was basically implied it was an aging community, okay? And I've been in the industry for 35 years, literally, okay? And so, but what's interesting is we're seeing a new set of folks coming in, you know, some of our very best client leads, you know, the guys that run these factories, director level, manager level of industrial engineering organizations, are in their early 30s. You know, they're just super excited people. They're very bright, either data scientists or industrial engineering or whatever. And so I would say that the industry is in a transition. Of course, that's driving a lot in the maintenance area and other places about things like, you know, intelligent learning and all those kinds of ML and other systems to aggregate the knowledge of the, I hate to call them legacy employee, but, you know, the employee that's retiring, you know, I don't know if that's the right term. But, you know, I would say that the industry is in a transformation right now where, you know, we're, and I'm looking to retire in 10 years. That's not too fast, you know. But the truth is we're making room, I think, for this next digital generation, which I think is going to be critical to the acceleration of the transformation. Because we really enjoy working with all levels, but we really enjoy working with kind of the newer generation at the working level. Yeah.
So I guess the whole data piece coming in the last decade or so with data science getting hot and sexy, you know, and coming into this industry, it made the whole industry sexier, I guess, in a way.
Well, I think it attracted a different group of people, right? Yeah. So if you go back in Semi's history, and I've done everything from R&D, process R&D, you know, everything you can think of in Semi. In the past, it was, you know, the chemi or, you know, the physicist or, you know, EE, you know, generally speaking around the device physics and the design, right? So more and more of that is becoming automated through EDA tools and other things. And we're not here to talk about that today. But the industrial engineering aspect, which was really candidly almost ignored for the first 30 years of the semiconductor industry, has now become so exciting. And it's become, and because of the fact that we are such a data-rich environment, these data scientists are saying, I want to go play in the backyard that has a bunch of toys, you know? And so I think we're really benefiting from the fact that we have invested so heavily, largely in connectivity and in data. We're just now investing more heavily in sensors and in what's called predicting. This chart that I have up here today is one with the smart manufacturing. I'm the co-chair of the North American Semi Smart Manufacturing Committee, and that's the Semi is the big group, of course, for all our industry. And this is the way we try to describe smart manufacturing. You know, at the top it says ROI, because why would you do anything if it doesn't make money? That's pretty obvious. But what's interesting is we break it down that really is smart is about connecting, sensing. You have to have information, and sensing could be as simple as I said, tool state data. But it also is all these different advanced sensors that are now being deployed, so you know more about the process tool. Connecting is a big deal. The digital twin's in the middle. We're here to talk about that today. It's very important to know that a digital twin is not a database. It's a smart learning representation of your factory. It is nested inside of it, so many models, et cetera. It has a model of every single tool you have. It has the ability to adapt and learn from historical events to be able to predict the future. And then the right side is the only real ROI part, which is when you take all the information that's housed in the digital twin, which is largely ones and zeros, and you turn them into predicting applications. And so it's kind of helpful to just educate the world on the fact that you really need all three But they don't all have to be done at the same time. So, that's important.
Right, yeah. Okay. Actually, John, maybe we talked a little bit about talent in this sector earlier. So there's a question actually from one. Yeah, so he's asking about, he said demand is actually increasing for engineers in the sector, but actually companies are struggling to find them. So do you have any strategies or advice on how?
That's a good question.
Yeah, how
so I can tell you what we do typically. So we don't have enough staff to just hire someone for you, okay? We do sometimes interview with you. So if we're working with a client, we'll say, you know what? We do an assessment. Here's what you have. You probably could use somebody of this skill type. And one of my guys will be on the interview panel with you, and we'll tell you where we think those people are, okay? Schools or certain curriculum, whatever. But probably the thing we do more often than that is we identify somebody within the existing organization, and we basically call it train the trainer, right? So we find somebody that has a pretty good aptitude that we can basically, throughout a project, take from maybe this level to that level. We just take that individual. It's kind of like going to on-the-job training, very intensive, kind of like a military training would be, and we bring them from their current status to significantly higher, and then that person becomes more or less, think of it as our single point of contact going forward, but at the same time, he or she becomes an expert in smart manufacturing. And we can take, I've never been to a factory that doesn't have somebody that we don't find within, probably the first 2 or 3 meetings that you can just tell by their interest level, their intellect, and their educational background has the background to be able to transform into that. And then we largely try to have them become the trainer of the next generation, the new college grad, et cetera. That seems to work well for us because we do try to deploy a solution that's a standalone. So our model is to dramatically reduce the number of subject matter experts you need to hire by embedding the intelligence in the software, and then largely working with you on what we would call a smart user configuration expert. And then we work with those people. We have meetings with them every week for the rest of their lives. And so they just continue to kind of evolve and participate in user groups and things like that are just training sessions to improve their CCPK over time.
Wow, talk about full service, huh? You provide software and the wetwares, they used to call it,
You have to, because if the only thing we care about is our customer success. And if you do, that means you need to be a partner with whatever the challenge is that your customer is facing today.
As much as you need to, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Okay, so I have another question on then, are there certain fundamental capabilities that need to be in place? I mean, as much as you come in with the support, even the kind of skills or people to train the trainer, the kind of thing, what other fundamental capabilities should there be in place before manufacturers even think about deploying digital twins?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mentioned earlier, and I hope I didn't offend anybody if you don't have an MES. By the way, if you don't have an MES or you have one that needs to be replaced, talk to us. There's a lot of affordable ones that, you don't need a multi-million-dollar MES. But basically, as I mentioned earlier, you need the connectivity part. Remember the middle column of the pillars. And so I just have a drawing here, which is kind of a really high-level representation of a factory. And on the left are the systems you're pretty much going to need. You need the things that are in an MES. And at the end of the day, you need to have everything that's clean data. I thought that was an excellent observation earlier. That represents your product flows, what places can run on what tools. If you're running a factory by sticky notes, this is a problem. But most factories today already have, very clear MES systems. You don't need recipe download, but you certainly need very clear recipe understanding and information and tool information. It's extremely helpful to have tool state data. We talked about that. That's largely what used to be called EI data or equipment interface data. And it really just means, do I know if my tool is up, if it's down, and what it's running and what process it's running? You don't have to have recipe download. Many factories do, but you don't need that to do a smart factory. That's more of a quality initiative, and we support it and suggest it. But you really just have to have your data well managed, and then effectively us or anybody else who's going to do a digital twin come in and connect to all the sources. that's the value of bringing in a third party, is they have the ability, it's called ETL, which is an acronym for extract, transfer, and load, to connect to all these different systems and aggregate it into one smart digital twin. So then you don't need to replace or eliminate any of your existing investment over the last 25 years. You basically put a smart layer on top of your existing infrastructure. So I would say the main thing you do need is access to a good MES, and you need tool state. And I mentioned earlier today, it's very, very helpful to have location tracking, because if you just think about it, you know, you're creating a model and a simulation that has to be real time, and you're literally rescheduling the factory every roughly 3 minutes, which means you better know where everything is. And so that is something that is probably the most common gap, is that many legacy factories do not have location tracking. The good thing is it's probably the cheapest thing available today. And so that's one of the first things that we could help people do. But yes, and then...
Yeah, it sounds like visibility is key then, right? This panopticon view of everything that you have going in the organization, regardless of where they are, you know, across different repositories of data. You need to have that visibility all across it, right?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So first of all, there's, like everything in life, every digital twin is an equivalent. And a basic digital twin, when you start with the legacy factory, may not include, for instance, all the maintenance information or all the FTC if they don't have FTC. The power of a digital twin is you can add on to it. You know, I mean, you can add capabilities, you can add more data, you can add more information. And so, but you are absolutely correct that, you know, it's effectively a holistic, you know, sucking in of every single thing about a factory operationally, and then using all of that to make intelligent real-time decisions. And that's the thing that is so transformative about smart manufacturing, quite frankly.
That's cool. Well, I'm afraid we're getting close to time, so I have to wrap up here. But thank you, John, so much for sharing all these information with us. So for our audience, you may have questions that you were too shy to ask John, but don't worry, you still have a chance to do so by joining our Interchange community platform to post questions and comments, interact with other participants, and also join the discussion forums. So information on joining Interchange is shown on the chat room. There's a link there, and in an email that you've received after the session today. So do take a minute to provide some feedback on this session and share your ideas on future topics with us. Again, a link to the recording of today's webinar will be posted also on the ITAP Connect website. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at Interchange at future episodes of ITAP Connect.